I want to start this episode with a question that I've been asked in various forms more times than I can count. How do I talk to my son about this stuff when I'm not sure I even have the right words? Sometimes it comes from a dad, a man who's got through his own puberty, probably on a mixture of misinformation, playground rumour, and quietly hoping for the best, who grew up in a house where bodies weren't discussed, where changes happening to him were treated as something to get through rather than to understand, who is now standing in front of a 10 or 11, 12 even boy who's starting to change and who wants to know more than anything to do this differently. He just doesn't know how. Sometimes it might come from a mum, and it might be a mum raising a son on her own, or whose partner's not around for this conversation for various reasons, who's sitting with a particular anxiety. Am I the right person to be talking to him about this? Wondering if her son will be embarrassed, wondering if she'll say the wrong thing, wondering if the fact that she hasn't lived in a boy's body means somehow she's disqualified from helping him understand it. She isn't, not even slightly, and we're going to talk about why. So today's episode is for both of those kind of parents, because boys need this conversation and they need it from a trusted adult, regardless of who that adult is or whether they've personally experienced it. What a 12-year-old boy is about to go through. I'm Ashley Costello, this is The Resilient Kid, and this is Growing Up Boy. So I'm going to tell you about two families. The first is a dad, let's call him Mark. Mark is 45, he's a very practical man, good with his hands, comfortable with silence, the kind of person who fixes rather than talks. And he's got a son, Theo, who's 11, going on 12. And Mark has been aware for a few months now that something's shifting with Theo. Theo's moods are bigger. His body's changing. There's a new kind of quiet in him. Not sad, just private quiet. And Mark recognises it because he remembers being that age and feeling like his body was doing things without asking permission. He remembers the confusion, the embarrassment, the absolute certainty that whatever was happening was probably happening to only him and was probably certainly wrong. Now, nobody talked to Mark about this. His own father was a good man who worked hard, loved his family, but would not have known where to begin. So Marcus got through it alone, and he told himself that was fine. But sitting across from me with Theo, approaching the age where Marcus was when all of this started, he said something I want you all to hear. I don't want him to feel like I did, like it's all happening in the dark, like there was nobody to ask. And he paused. I just need someone to tell me what to actually say. Brilliant. Second family is a mum. I'm going to call her Priya. Priya is 38. She's been raising her son Jude alone since he was 6, not by design, but just circumstance. And she's done it with grace and steadiness and a particular resourcefulness of a parent who's learnt to be more than one thing at once. Jude is 12 now. Priya's noticed recently, with a mixture of tenderness and alarm, that he's turning into someone slightly different. He's taller, he's quieter, increasingly, unmistakably, a person who does not want to discuss his body with his mum. She came to me not because she thought she was doing anything wrong, but she wanted to do it right. He's going to get this information from somewhere, and I'd rather it comes from me, but every time I try and bring it up, he goes completely silent, stares at the ceiling, and I lose my nerve. And she smiled. I grew up with sisters. I know everything that happens with girls. I know considerably less about what is happening to my son. And I said, okay, let's start there. Let's make sure you know so that you can make sure he knows. Okay, the research. What's actually happening and why does it matter? So before we get back to Mark and Priya, I want to spend some time on the what, because I think one of the things that makes this conversation hard for parents, particularly those who haven't lived in a boy's body, but honestly, many who have, aren't entirely sure what they're supposed to be covering. So we're going to go through it. And what I'm going to say to you now is, just very randomly, I happened to see a copy today, of all days, when I'm going to record this podcast, of the legal and statutory slides that sex education is in this country. Now, it wasn't a faith school. There was 50 slides that I got hold of in this presentation. That was across two or three sessions, I think. Now, I just happen to know, because of the reason why I had hold of them, is that 10 of them there was pictures on. And when I say pictures, pictures of bodies, organs, parts. And out of those 10, three were nude person. So woman who's naked and man who's naked. I think there was actually, I want to say there was 2 women naked on individual slides. The actual parts of the body were on, probably out of all of those 50 slides, only on 6. And when I looked at the pictures of the naked man, naked woman, do you know what sprung to mind? Do you remember in the 60s when there was that Joy of Sex book out? And I'm sure it's still out, I'm sure it's been updated, however. But it's that kind of vibe. And I just think, is that what we're showing our kids still? In this day and age, this image of a very old-fashioned picture of bodies. So it is woefully inadequate in trying to explain these. Trying to explain sex education and what our bodies do in school. Don't rely on that, because there is a few different reasons. One, just because it's statutory that they see it doesn't make it good. Just because we say in year 5 you should learn about sex ed does not make it good. I can tell you, looking at that, it is not good. Realistically, I went through it and I was like, so lots and lots of questions for the kids. It's neither good, nor is it really that informative. So let's have a look. Let's go through it, not clinically, not like a textbook, but in a way I want someone to talk to me, if I were that parent sat in the chair, somebody who is talking to young people, because it'd be really interesting to know, and you can put right in the comments, how did you find out? How did you find out about what we used to call the birds and the bees? How did you get your sex education? For me, I got a book about Claire Rayner. Not about Claire Rayner, written by Claire Rayner, who used to be an old agony aunt on the TV years and years ago. And that book was presented to me, and it was supposed to have everything in there. It absolutely didn't. It really didn't. So I'd love to hear from you. How did you learn about sex? Okay, so let's have a look. Puberty in boys typically begins somewhere between the ages of 9 and 14. The wide range matters because it's one of the most common causes of anxiety for boys. If they're developing at a different pace to their peers, earlier or later than the boys around them. So, research by the PSHE Association on puberty education is clear that normalising this range, telling boys specifically there is no particular single age for this to begin, is one of the most reassuring things. What happens and roughly when, I can give you. Okay? Now, I will always use the medical terms because when I first, years and years ago, I used to work for victim support. And I think I told this story last week, but when I worked for victim support, I was one of the very few therapists that worked with children. And unfortunately, Greater Manchester at that time had a huge amount of sexual abuse cases. And so I became a bit of the go-to authority. And using medical names takes out any ambiguity if there is a case for sexual abuse. So if you are embarrassed about using penis, scrotum, testicles, and we will go through the girls' names next week, if you are embarrassed, you need to get over yourself. And I don't say that very often to parents, but it isn't about us as parents. We need to get over that embarrassment, and what we need to do is protect our kids, and what we need to do is inform them properly. The last thing you want to do, so there's two things, isn't there? You want to protect them from abusers, and you also want to protect them from that playground bully when your young man is using the word willy or winky, stuff like that. So let's just use the proper names and be all grown-ups about it. Okay, so first sign usually is the growth of the testicles and scrotum, followed by pubic hair. The penis grows first in length, then in width. Body hair appears under the arms, on the face, and the voice begins to change, often unpredictability. It's very unpredictable when that voice changes. As having a young singer in the house who is a boy, I can honestly say we were surprised. It literally felt like it was overnight. We didn't get any warning signs. And what I would say is that's probably the most embarrassing for the young lads, because everybody around them starts to notice. Height often increases significantly. Muscle mass develops, the skin changes, it produces more oil, which is why spots become part of the picture all of a sudden. All of this is driven by a surge of testosterone, the hormone that orchestrates male puberty. Alongside the physical changes, testosterone also influences the mood. So boys in puberty often experience what researchers describe as emotional intensity, stronger feelings, faster to anger, more prone to frustration, combined with a reduced ability to identify and talk about those feelings. Why is that? Just at the point that they need to be able to talk about their feelings, they can't. And that is because the brain is literally having an overhaul. If you have heard me in the podcast previously, you will know that I talk about teenage pruning in the brain. And it is just the brain's way of reorganizing itself. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, impulse control, and emotional regulation and organization, won't be fully developed and in boys until late 20s. And there is some research that came out last December 2025 that actually looked like it's going into the 30s. So just heads up. So we have a boy whose body is changing rapidly, whose emotions are amplified, whose brain is under construction, and who is in most cases receiving very little information about any of it from the adults in their life. Now, let's talk about specific things that parents find the hardest to bring up with their lads, because I think research is really helpful here. Now, I've got a friend, and I remember having this conversation with her, and she was a single mum, and she's a cracking mum, and she was like, I'm not talking to him about that kind of thing. His dad can, but knowing full well that his dad was not going to have that conversation. And I said, you need to help him, support him, and protect him. And she just was mortified. She was so embarrassed. She just couldn't have the conversation. So let's start with the obvious: erections. Boys begin experience erections, including spontaneous, unexpected erections that have no connection to sexual arousal, from early puberty. Research by Dr. Andrew Seiler, who specialises in adolescent male development, emphasises that one of the most important things boys need to hear is that spontaneous erections are completely normal. They are not like something that they have caused. They are not something that they can reliably control. The analogy I use here is, think of it like hiccups. Your body is doing something involuntary without asking your permission. at the least convenient time possible, usually. And it's just biology. It's not behaviour. It doesn't mean anything other than it's working. Your body is working. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to. Now, I was in a Catholic school today, and we were talking about sex ed. And because I was doing some training, we do a lot of CPD in schools. And I said, oh, guess what I was doing this morning? And we was talking about it. And this next bit, I was really surprised at. I didn't know this. So, did you know that wet dreams are called nocturnal emissions? Me neither. Ejaculation during sleep. So typically begin between the ages of 11 and 15, and it's the body's way of releasing semen that's built up. It's completely normal. They're not caused by anything the boy has done. They don't require any action beyond ordinary hygiene. What they do require, though, is a conversation beforehand, because a boy who discovers this has happened without any prior warning is likely to feel alarmed, confused, anxious, and probably deeply alone. Research consistently shows that boys who are not prepared for wet dreams describe the experience as frightening. 5-minute conversation ahead of time can change that completely. Okay, now this one is the one that the parents often skip: masturbation. And it's the ones the boys need to hear about, and I would argue girls, and we'll do that next week, self-stimulation. It's a normal part of sexual development. The majority of boys begin exploring their bodies in this way during puberty. Debbie, now I might say her name wrong, this researcher in Indiana University, Debbie Herbenick, I think her name is, if I've remembered it rightly. Her research has said very clear the shame attached to masturbation, the sense that it's wrong, dirty, something to be hidden, causes real and lasting harm. Boys who grow up with shame around masturbation are more likely to carry the shame into their adult sexual relationships. We don't want that. We don't want that. So, what do they need to hear? It's simple. This is normal. It's a private behaviour. It doesn't harm them. And it's nothing to feel ashamed of. They also need to hear what sits alongside that. Pornography is not sex, and it's not sex education. What they might encounter online bears very little relationship to real relationships. Healthy intimacy and the pleasure and respect are not opposites. We'll go into much more detail on all of that in episode 6, the parent guide to talking about sex. But the foundation gets laid here in this conversation at this age. So I'm going to give you the top tips as usual. What to say, how to say it. So here are 5 things that are going to help, whether you're a dad who needs to hear the words, a mom who's wondering whether she's the right person to be giving them. And I do know some mums who have gone, should I ask my dad? If their partner or previous partner or child's dad is not on the scene, should I ask my dad? Would you want your granddad to talk to you about this? Probably not. Has things probably changed? Probably. And you know what? You're their trusted adult. So, come on. Big girl pants on, big boy pants on. Let's do this for our kids. 1. Use the correct anatomical language every single time. Penis, testicle, scrotum, erection, ejaculation. I know they feel clinical. They are also accurate, respectful, protective. Research by the NSPCC is unambiguous. Boys who know the correct words for their own bodies carry less shame, better equipped to seek help if something is wrong or uncomfortable. Slang teaches boys these parts of themselves are somehow too much to name properly. Correct language says your body is not embarrassing, it's just a body, it's just biology. 2. Lead with normalising. Whatever you are about to tell your son, start with the normal, something that happens to every boy around your ages. That framing of every boy is everything. It takes the conversation out of the personal into universal. He's not broken, he's not alone, he's doing exactly what every boy's body does. That sentence, said early, said often, is one of the most reassuring things you can offer. 3. For mums, you're not disqualified from this. Priya's anxiety that I was talking about earlier on in the podcast, am I the right person for this, is the one I hear constantly from single mums. And the answer is every time, yes. You do not need to have lived in a male body to tell your son what to expect from his. You need accurate information and a willingness to use it. In fact, a mother who has had the conversation is teaching her son something profound. That bodies are not shameful, that women are not people to be hidden from when it comes to the realities of the male experience, and that the adults in life are not going to leave him alone with this. That's huge. You've gone from that trusted adult to the North Star. 4. Use the car. And I say this in almost every episode because it is so true. The car is the single best location for difficult conversations for young people, or walking side by side. They can't leave, they don't have to make eye contact. The conversation can start and stop naturally as you progress on your journey. Mark had his first real conversation with Theo on a 40-minute drive to a football match. He told me afterwards it's the only reason it happened at all. I don't think I could have done it face to face myself, but by looking at the road, it somehow made it easier. And there's also that element that as a parent, we can't escape from the car or that walk. And sometimes we just need that to push us into those brave conversations. 5, this is important, particularly powerful for dads. Tell them what you wish you would have known. When I was your age, nobody told me any of this. And I want something different for you. That sentence does several things at once. It tells your son that what's happening to them is not new or strange. It tells them that the adults around them had the same experience. And it tells them without a big moment of it, not without the drama, this is a different kind of relationship. One where he doesn't have to figure it out alone. Okay, so back to the story. Mark. He went home from our session. And by the way, we don't just do sessions on sex ed. I know the last couple of episodes, it sounds like that's all we're here for. We're not. But we support families and support parents and carers in supporting their kids. So why would we not? This, with Mark, what actually came out was a family session. We often, instead of working with the kids directly, sometimes we have a family session with the parents or carers or whoever happens to be there. And we do that family session. Sometimes we host a family meeting, particularly with blended families. Sometimes we have a one-on-one session like this with Mark, where I go, what are you struggling with? Let me help. And this was the conversation we had. The fact that I'm very matter of fact really helps them. So, back to Mark. He went home from our session, did something I always suggest. He practiced it out loud, in the car, alone, on the way to the supermarket. He said the words, and I often say this, if you are uncomfortable with the anatomical words, because that's not what you grew up with, and funny story coming next week with the girls, if you are embarrassed with them or you didn't grow with them so you're not used to saying them, say them out loud. Penis, testicles, erection. Until they stop feeling strange. Mark told me afterwards he felt slightly ridiculous, but it also worked, talking them out loud. 3 weeks later, Saturday morning, drive to Theo's football. Turn the radio down. He didn't launch into a prepared speech. He didn't say, I'm going to tell you about the birds and the bees. He said, you know you're getting to an age where your body's going to start changing a bit if it hasn't already. I think we should probably talk about it. Theo said nothing and then just said okay. And I'm going to say something important here. If they say, I don't want to talk about it, that might be okay for now, but it can't be off the agenda forever. You don't want them 30 meeting somebody and now you've got to have the talk because they're still living at home. Okay, so you might not feel comfortable right now, but actually we do have to have this talk. So if you don't want to have it now on the way to football, That's absolutely okay, but just know we're going to have this talk this weekend or tonight or whenever, okay? So that was just the beginning. It wasn't a revelation, just a door that opened to a conversation by a very practical man in a car on a Saturday morning for a boy who needed to know he wasn't alone in all this. Mark covered some of it that day. He talked about erections. Mark used the word very matter-of-factly. Theo's looking out the window. Mark kept talking. And after about 30 seconds, the awkwardness started to pass. He mentioned wet dreams. He told Theo it was going to happen, what it was, and that it didn't mean anything except that his body was doing what it was designed to do. Theo asked 2 questions. Both were very practical. Both were exactly the right question for a boy who'd been told something new and was quietly relieved. On the way into the football ground, Theo said, "Thanks, Dad." Just that. Marcus told me it was one of the best conversations he's ever had, and it was by most measures deeply unremarkable. And that's the point. We make such a thing about this, and it's really important that we don't. Okay. Now, Priya took a different approach. She bought a book, one she'd researched carefully, and left it in Jude's room. She then knocked on his door that evening and said, "I've put something on your desk. Have a read when you want, and if you've got any questions, or even if you haven't, I'm here." Jude read the book, and she knew because, as mums tend to do, it had moved. Then she'd noticed. He didn't bring it up for 3 days, and by this point, Priya is beside herself because she wants to ask all the questions, because don't we? We want to know all the things. And then, breakfast, random Wednesday morning, he asked her a question about something he read. Very careful, very specific, delivered in the middle of his cereal rather than at her face. She answered it calmly, correctly, without making a big moment of it. He nodded, went back to his cereal. "I could have hugged him," Priya said, "but I absolutely did not, because then that would have ruined everything." And she's right. She'd read the room perfectly. The information had landed, the channel was open, and Jude at 12 knew his mum was a safe person to ask. That's not a small thing. In the years ahead, when the questions get bigger, when the situations get more complex, that knowledge will matter more than either of them can currently imagine. So take it slow. Take it easy. I want us to just zoom out for a moment, and I want to talk about the bigger picture for when boys don't get this conversation. We know from research and the work that we do every day, boys who don't receive an accurate, age-appropriate information about their bodies from trusted adults do not remain uninformed. They get their information from somewhere else, from their peers, who are often just as uninformed, from the internet, which is not designed to educate, it is usually designed to titillate, from pornography, which is the single most distorting possible source of information about sex, bodies, and what healthy intimacy looks like. The Internet Watch Foundation estimates that most boys in the UK have encountered pornography before they've had a meaningful conversation about sex with a trusted adult. That means their first framework for understanding their own sexuality is the lens through which they interpret everything else that follows. Is built from a context that was adult entertainment, not adolescent education. And that is why it's really important we have these conversations early. By law, it's year 5. So we are talking 9/10. It's usually this term, which is summer term of year 5. So most kids are usually 10 when they're having this kind of conversation. But there will be the odd one that is still 9. Now, the consequences of that are not abstract. We see them in our work, in boys who've developed distorted expectations about sex, in boys who carry shame about their own bodies and desires because what they see online doesn't match what they feel, and nobody's ever told them that it's a mismatch because what they're seeing isn't real. The young men who don't know how to talk about any of this is because nobody's ever modelled it for them. The PSHE Association and the Sex Education Forum both publish clear guidance on this early, ongoing, accurate puberty education, delivered by trusted adult, using the correct language, without shame, matter of fact, is one of the most protective things we can offer for a boy. Not just for his sexual health, but for his emotional development, his understanding of himself, and any future relationships. For the kind of man he's going to become. Mark's Saturday morning conversation didn't cover everything, and it wasn't supposed to. It opened a door. In our next episode, when we talk about growing up girl, we will see why that door matters, not just for boys themselves, but the relationships they might go on to have with girls and women in their life. These conversations connect. They build on each other. They all start here, whether it's in a car, on a Saturday, with a practical man who turned down the radio and said, I thought we should probably talk about it. I want to speak directly, as we come to the end of this episode, to one or two people. First, to the dad who's listening and thinking, I don't have the words, I didn't have this conversation, I don't know where to start. You don't have to have all this conversation model for you in order to be able to start it. You need the information, of course, and I've put that in the show notes below. There is going to be an episode later in the season addressed directly to your son. You need to be willing to be slightly uncomfortable for 20 minutes. You need to know that your son is not going to remember how awkward he felt. He's going to remember that you showed up. And that is enough. It is more than enough. And just like Priya, the podcast might be a way in of opening that door for you. We are trying everything that we can to give you the skills, the tools, the words to have these conversations open and honest with your child. Second, to the mum who's wondering whether she's the right person, you are, unequivocally, without qualification, absolutely yes. Your son does not need a parent who's lived in a male body. He needs a parent who loves him enough to sit down with their own discomfort and embarrassment sometimes, so he doesn't have to sit with his alone. He needs to know the adults in his life are not embarrassed by his body or their own, that there are no questions too strange or too embarrassing to ask. And that whatever is happening to him is normal, expected, and there's somebody safe to talk about it. And that person can be you. It has to be someone, and please make sure it's you. Because if we don't give them that information, they will find it elsewhere. And that is the worry. Okay, that's Growing Up Boy. Thank you for being here for this one. The next episode, we're going to do the same for girls. If you have a daughter, work with girls, simply want to understand what's happening in the other half of your children's friendship groups, don't miss it. All research and references, the puberty timeline, the further reading are in the show notes. And coming later in the season, episode 7 is addressed directly to boys aged 10 and up. Safe to share, built for them, designed to be listened to with or without you in the room. However, I also want you to have that conversation with them. So even if they listen to it in their own comfort, I want you then to open that conversation. I can open the door for you. You need to go in yourself. Until next time, turn the radio down, start the conversation.